Okay, folks, we've just gotten some breaking news from the Prime Minister's office. We are hearing that the Prime Minister has just announced he's going to be traveling next week from November 18th to the 24th for a bilateral visit to Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates.
Well, isn't that nice? Folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at how not even 48 hours after a Liberal member criticized the budget has the mainstream media pivoted back to focusing on Pierre Polyv and the Conservatives. We're going to be taking a look at that and a few other stories that took place yesterday. So like, comment, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's dive into the news. Now, I'm not quite sure how Mark Carney's travel is considered breaking news, but we'll return back to the rest of her announcement in a little bit, as it does tie into the main story, which, as most of you know, not even 48 hours after a Liberal member decided to come out and criticize Carney's budget, the mainstream media has decided to refocus again on Pierre and the Conservatives because of the press conference that Pierre had yesterday. I'm sure most of you have already seen quite a bit of it, but take a look at the opening for CBC's coverage of this and what David Cochrane says at the end here.
We begin with that appearance today from Conservative leader Pierre Polyv. For the first time, he took questions about one MP crossing the floor to the Liberals and another announcing their intention to resign from politics. The CBC's Kate McKenna is here to walk us through what happened. Okay, Kate, reporters have been waiting for a while to speak to Pierre Polyv about the events of the last weeks. I mean, what did we hear from the leader today?
Well, I think it's safe to say that he doubled down. You know, he was asked a handful of questions about what happened last week, what could potentially happen with his caucus, because, of course, there have been rumblings swirling around that perhaps there's more unrest within his caucus, and he stands by his leadership. He deflected most of the questions, but did say that he doesn't plan on changing his leadership style. Take a listen to what he said.
I just want to put Carney and the Liberals to the side here, just as you personally.
Of course you do.
Does this say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada, where our people who work hard can afford a home and food. That is my agenda.
So he took 3 questions total on sort of caucus management issues, and in each one of them he reverted to something that Chris d'Entremont said in September in the House of Commons when he was still a Conservative MP, where he criticized the Liberal government. He repeated this multiple times. He also kind of criticized the media because Nate Erskine-Smith, a Liberal MP, put out a video where he kind of offered the budget a mixed review, and he said that there's a double standard, that we are not, journalists are not chasing him down the hallway to get answers on that, but they are with Conservatives. Take a listen to some of what he said about Chris d'Entremont and what he said in September.
Well, first of all, I just quote Mr. d'Entremont, and I will just quote Mr. d'Entremont. He said, and I'm going to quote Mr. d'Entremont, this is a quote from just a few months ago. I have a statement here from Mr. d'Entremont. He says, since the Liberals came to power, food prices have risen 40%. He said that Liberal food price inflation was inhumane. And you know what? He's right.
So this an apparent effort to discredit what d'Entremont is saying, and comments he's made since crossing the floor, including that part of his rationale was Pierre Polyev's leadership. We did put those comments to Chris d'Entremont this afternoon. He sent us an email in which he said, they are spinning. I've said what I needed to. He continues to prove my point. So the question now becomes whether or not this is enough to put this issue to rest, or whether or not Pierre Polyev can expect to face more questions to this effect ahead of his leadership review, ahead of the budget vote next week.
Right. And I just want to point out, the audience who watched Monday would remember, we did talk about Nate Erskine-Smith in his video on the show for about 15 minutes, and I invited Nate Erskine-Smith on the show today. He couldn't do it, but he is potentially coming on the program tomorrow.
So they had a 15-minute segment on Monday about it, so it sounds like we should just squash this and move on from Nate Erskine-Smith's comments. Yet when Pierre made the comments about the RCMP, or when the floor crossing happened, or the resignation, these guys have been running with Pierre and the Conservatives in the mainstream media for the past 3 to 4 weeks. There have been multiple half-hour, 20-minute, 10-minute panels on Pierre, his leadership, the confidence in there, what this all means, his comments about the RCMP. They've done hours of coverage on that. But he's saying, yeah, we did a 15-minute segment on it, so, we should be fine. Now, during the press conference, Pierre called out CBC and how they had to do a correction. David Cochran, of course, has to defend it and say, listen, we weren't the ones who wrote the article. We were just taking what Chris D'Entremont said, and later on he corrected himself, so that's what the correction actually was.
Now, at that same press conference, when asked about the state of his leadership and the unity of his caucus, Polyv turned the table on the reporters, criticizing them for lack of coverage on divisions in the Liberal caucus and for some corrections in the coverage of recent events.
I know that there will be wall-to-wall coverage on CTV of this turmoil, of a Liberal MP criticizing his own budget days before the vote. I know you're camped outside his office right now, waiting to get comment from him. I know you've been chasing Mark Carney down hallways to find out what he has to say. Are you with CBC, by the way?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay, right.
I'm just curious if you think that could lead to more MPs leaving your caucus and what you think he means by that.
Well, first of all, CBC has had to correct the falsehoods that they put into that story. So I encourage you to tell Canadians about the falsehoods you published and explain why you did that.
Okay, just on that last point, there was an article published on Sunday on cbc.ca that was later updated with what the editors decided to call a correction. The initial version of the story accurately reported what Chris D'Entremont said in an interview on a CBC program. Chris D'Entremont later called back, clarified those comments, and the story was updated to reflect that. The correction is by Chris D'Entremont. The mistake, or the bad impression, whatever you want to say about it, was from Chris D'Entremont. It was not an editorial mistake by the CBC writer. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Now, what I find interesting is David does bring up the fact that the correction should have been announced later on in this clip, which we'll get to in a second, but he does try to brush it under the rug, saying, well, I don't really want to get too much into it, like the inside baseball of it all. But when he then moves on to Lisa Raitt, the conservative representative on the panel, he tries to change subjects by saying, again, we did talk about Nate Erskine-Smith on Monday, but Lisa brings it back to the fact of what the importance of addressing CBC's correction meant, because in the States, Donald Trump is suing the BBC for misrepresentation. They've already lost I believe he's the CEO of the BBC. And this isn't the first time that Pierre's had issues with the mainstream media. If you remember last year, CTV kind of did the same thing that they just did with Trump on the BBC, where they spliced two separate sections of what he was saying to make it sound like he said something different. But again, this is what Lisa had to say.
Lisa, I wonder what you make from that. And just, I should also point out, we did talk about the Nate Erskine-Smith video on the show on Monday, and Nate Erskine-Smith, he can't do it today, but he's willing to come on tomorrow. So just so you know, what do you make of what we saw from Pierre Polyv today, the pushback and the aggression there?
Sure. I think two things going on here. Number one, in order to refute the story out there that the problem is with Pierre's leadership, they're going to try to impeach the witness. The witness in this case, Chris D'Entremont, and they're showing prior inconsistent statements, which is a very clear tactic that's been used for many, many years, if not for all of time, in terms of making sure that you're getting your point across, that the person who said the things that really are trying to harm you can't be believed, can't be taken at their word. And they're putting out examples of it, the speech that you just showed before, and other indications of what he may have said to his constituents in the past. So that's the route they're going to take on how to deal with the Chris D'Entremont story. The other aspect with respect to the CBC reporter. Look, David, I was just for the last couple of days in the UK, and as you probably know from the news over there, the head of the BBC and the head of the BBC News have both resigned because of something that happened with respect to a Donald Trump speech way back in January. It was around January 6th, at the time of insurrection. Anyway, it would appear that they pushed two pieces of video together. They didn't separate them, made it seem that Mr. Trump was saying one thing and not the other. And they both got fired over it because it proved to be incorrect. It was, as Donald Trump says, fake news. And now Donald Trump's suing them for $1 billion. Why am I telling you this? This is a very common theme out there that people are honing in on, which is, can you trust what's happening with respect to news? Doesn't matter if it's CBC or CTV. Both of them actually got glancing blows from Polyv today in the press conference. But it's a theme that's happening around the world. And unfortunately, in the case of BBC, it proved to be correct.
Yes, and the Director General resigned in that one. And there is an interesting dynamic going on with the President and the media writ large. I would say that the changes in the CBC story should have been a clarification or an update, but that, I don't want to inside baseball on that too much.
So again, there he is acknowledging that it should have been addressed, but he's saying, hey, it's just some inside baseball. Let's kind of move on. And as they moved on, they continued to talk about Pierre's tone and tenor and the way he was addressing the reporters and how he was kind of snarky and snippy with them, and saying how he hasn't really learned anything. This is him back almost a year ago on the campaign trail when he was up by so many points, and the way he was addressing the reporters, his style needs to change. And Lisa comes back with one of the greatest responses, I feel. Take a look for yourselves.
I mean, Lisa, we mentioned the January leadership review, not to suggest there's any real doubt, but just because it's a milestone that he kind of needs to put behind him to move ahead. But, the party has become as much a movement. There's a lot of movement conservatives there because of Pierre Polyv who've rallied to him. I mean, while he's pulled that together, it did prove not to be enough. And if you have more days like today, does that just deepen the negative feelings that exist outside of the people already committed to vote conservative? Is that the risk you run here?
Yeah, I think the risk is the analysis that I'm hearing today, that we're taking this moment in time as the way things are going to be into the future. Let me paint a little bit of a different picture for you, because I do think that Pierre's tone is going to match a time in the future that will be actually beneficial to the Conservatives. And it's this kind of situation. We're 8 months since the election. We're continuing along the ways of talking about major projects. We're stretching into a year, maybe 14, 15 months. Employment keeps sinking. We keep having problems with inflation, and we're not seeing projects happen, and we're not seeing people feel the impacts of the promises that are being made by the Liberals. And then you have the tone of somebody who's saying, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight everyone. I'm going to fight everyone I can for you because you are not being treated fairly. That's the moment in time when tone meets what's happening on the ground in Canada. And that is not a situation that is not foreseeable. It is very foreseeable. So yeah, Pierre's going to stick to who he is and what he knows. And at some point in time, if the Liberals do not pull this off, they are on a very short leash on a timeline that's probably unfair to them, quite frankly, as a government. But that is the reality of our situation.
And Lisa's not wrong, because when it comes down to it, this isn't a feelings type situation where you don't like the way that Pierre's talking or it upsets you. The panel talked extensively about how Pierre needs to change his tone and tenor, how he needs to draw in more, say, female voters. But when reality sets in and you realize that you're getting screwed by the Carney Liberals just like the Trudeau Liberals were screwing you, I don't really think you're going to care too much about the way Pierre sounds. You're going to have to actually listen to what he's saying and not how he's saying it. And Carney has been proving that he's not really working for you. He's supposed to be announcing a new tranche of these nation-building projects. He's already getting backlash from a few of them. I mean, David Cochrane actually had this climate advocate on who questioned Mark Carney's economic chops.
I think that's the direction we need to look for in announcing these projects. And I'm surprised that our banker-in-chief doesn't know the economics. It's simple economics. Go with something that is a lot more surefire rather than something that's risky, financially risky and legally risky.
But even with that guy on the program, the CBC still had to defend why Mark Carney is doing the things he's doing. Like earlier when you saw the announcement of the breaking news that he's traveling. This is the rest of that segment.
This, of course, is to push for further trade agreements and bolstering the ties between these two countries as a result of the ongoing trade war with the United States. And then, of course, he is headed to the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. The Prime Minister is saying the UAE and South Africa represent two of the world's largest emerging markets, and the G20 encompasses 85% of the world's economy. Canada's new government is focused on creating high-paying careers at home with new partners, new deals, and new investors to build Canada and to build Canada strong. So this is on top of the fact that Anita Anand, while she's at her foreign ministers meeting in Niagara, does have a meeting today with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. But it's been made clear that those two will not be addressing the issue of tariffs.
And that right there is a huge problem. Now, on the CBC's YouTube page, they actually did not add this section of the interview or this panel that David Cochrane had. But Lisa Raitt pointed out the fact that they need to be doing something. Anita Anand should be talking to Marco Rubio about the tariff situation, trying to get maybe some communication happening, because Carney's not doing anything. And David Cochrane tries to say, no, she shouldn't do it because that's not her file. She shouldn't be stepping, out of bounds sort of thing, when nobody else is actually moving. We need to have some sort of movement. We have to actually have somebody putting their foot forward to try to get this relationship started again, because Carney keeps saying that we need to diversify, but they are our biggest trading partner. We are still going to have to rely on them. The Bank of Canada has already said that. There's been so many reports on saying that we can't decouple ourselves from the U.S. no matter how much other trade Carney tries to get. But listen to what Elisa had to say here.
Carney and Smith are like Ford and Freeland. It is a remarkable political dynamic. But Lisa, just on that point, like creating that, yes, I'm on it, I've got a plan. Is that enough? Like for now, that it's a priority, it's a focus, and you're seeing activity, at least in a process sense, if you're not actually seeing the specific outcomes. Is that enough for people right now?
Maybe, but I'm going to put my cynical hat on right now and say that I'm not surprised the Globe and Mail got a bit of a taste as to what's in the announcement, given that Marco Rubio was in Niagara-on-the-Lake today. Nobody's talking about the fact that we didn't push him on why we can't get back to the table on negotiating a deal with the United States. Minister Anand was asked about it, and she said, I didn't bring it up because it's somebody else's file. We should be talking about that. That's an important opportunity for us to try to get back to the table. And yet we're talking about Pierre Polyv, and we're talking about announcements of lists of stuff that won't get filled for 15 years. Okay,
but on that, I mean, should the Foreign Affairs Minister be talking to the Secretary of State on trade when Ambassador Hillman's talking to Jameson Greer, Howard Lutnick, and Dom LeBlanc, Donald Trump, and Mark Carney are talking? Like, she'd get in trouble with this Prime Minister, wouldn't she? And Rubio might too.
No. I would say if we take a Team Canada approach, and if we encourage people to talk across the border to anybody they possibly can about the importance of the relationship, then you take every opportunity you possibly can to talk about the importance of the relationship. You don't say, I didn't bring it up at all.
And that's what it seems like they continue to do with this relationship. Carney gets questioned on, have you reached out to Donald Trump yet? Or have you had any talks with him? He says, well, he's got my number. What does that mean? You think the U.S. president is going to go out of his way to message you? Why are you not doing anything to show that you're trying to save our economies? Oh yeah, we'll just give you guys subsidies. Who's paying for all that? Like, these are the things that they keep doing right in our face, and the people who voted for them still seem to be asleep. But with all that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. If you guys can, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.